talking to some folks in the lobby here. I put up a few topics to talk about, and this was like the only non-technical topic. And since it got voted, I'm happy to talk about it. So the first thing at Google that's important is that we all get up in the morning thinking about the same thing, give or take, right? So there's from an innovation point of view, having a clear mission of what you're about, or what your company is about, or what your product is about, is really, really important. So Google's mission, of course, is to organize the world's information and make it universally useful and accessible. So that becomes kind of the binding force for a lot of things we do. And you won't believe it. It sounds like a mission statement, vision statement, whatever purpose of the company. But we'll actually be in meetings where some idea will come up or whatever, and people will go, that'll never become a business, or that's not really important, or whatever. And you go, no, hang on a second. This is really about information. It's about organizing information. It's about applications where people have a lot of information. And therefore, what can we do to make it more useful and accessible to users? So having that is a really, really core part, even for innovation, even for a company like Google, to have a clear mission. Next, there's a lot of focus. So Google is a very engineering-driven company, a very technology-driven company. So engineers are sort of at the top of the totem pole for the whole company, right? The founders, sort of legend has it that even up until a couple of years ago, you would get Sergey to go do a build or Larry to check in code, and of course people would be really scared that they were doing that because God knows what they were checking in. But these are not very clear, are they? But anyway, so it's a very engineering-driven company, very product-driven company. So we're constantly asking the question, what could be a googly solution to a problem, right? What could be different about solving a problem? What would make sense to solve a problem? So this is an example from Gmail. How many of you use Gmail, just by a sort of show of hands? Well, that's almost everyone. When we were starting off with Gmail, I hear that people are going, storage can't possibly be free, right? I mean, it's very expensive. Sort of, I lived in the Bay Area for a while in the US, and you go down to Fry's Electronics, and even though the prices were trending down, it's going to be really hard to get cheap storage, right? So guess what? A couple of engineers would literally go down to Fry's every once in a while, which is a local electronics store there, and buy hardware and start really working on storage and storage optimization in terms of what's the maximum amount of information I can store in a redundant way on disk, even though RAID existed, even though so many other technologies existed. The same thing on the product side. So why does everything, and some people hate this, right? And my dad in particular does. Why does everything have to be in folders, right? What is this notion of folder? Eventually, the folder is a method for organization. Can there be an alternate way to organize information? Can there be a well, guess what? We came up with this notion of, if you have really good search for your email, right, and then you have this notion of labels, then that kind of gets you almost all the way there in terms of what you want. Because if you can find the information that you want, you don't really need to go, have a 3-tiered folder hierarchy and go put stuff there. Again, was, radical at the time when we did it, both the storage thought as well as the fact that it's going to be organized from a search point of view and a labels point of view and not folders. So that's sort of from an innovation point of view, one of the first things, which is, how do you figure out how to break the mold for solving a problem? The way we do that is, I'll skip the news example, is an insane amount of focus on the user. I'm reminded of the talk yesterday evening, which was the, don't be obsessive compulsive about chasing Japanese girls. Well, we're obsessive compulsive about our users, right? So you'll find, so I'm in product management, so you'll find a lot of product managers, even engineers, we just go out in the field and we go talk to people and we say, what do you use and why do you use it and does it work or does it not work? Or how do you do, how do you do a certain thing? How do you do payment for your electricity bill, right? What do you do? It's nothing to try to push a Google product or whatever, but we really try to understand. I apologize for the quality of the pictures here. I don't know why it's not projecting that clearly. And if you look at this picture, we look at them in a variety of different contexts, right? It's not just while doing an application, right? So a lot of companies will run focus groups or user studies, and they'll bring people in and say, here's Gmail or here's YouTube, go knock yourself silly or do this task or whatever. We will actually, live and hang out with these people, right? Sometimes for hours, sometimes for days at end, sometimes in their context, right? So I'm based out of Bangalore in India, I will go, for example, go and visit schools and be in the school from 9 to 10, 9 to the evening till whenever the school lasts. I'm just sitting there in the lab, seeing what these kids are doing, and every once in a while just going and asking them, saying, oh, as soon as the teacher left, the kid gets onto Orkut, which is like the social networking thing there, and just sort of observing user behavior. So anyway, so the sort of point number 2 is have an insane amount of focus on who your user is, what is the problem that you're solving for them, why does that problem work from them. Particularly, get asked a lot of times, do you focus on what a particular competitor is doing, right? Company X or company Y or a new product launch. Very, very, and I worked for IBM for over a decade. Very, 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 very rarely, if at all, do we ever saying, oh, because John Doe launched this product, therefore we must go do that, right? We're always, so that actually helps free up a lot of creative, innovative thinking, where you're not constrained to either being a Me Too player or being, just repeating sort of the same product or the solution, right? The second thing, and that this is just fortunate because we landed on search and ads as our core business model, which works really well, is having a business model is not really important. I think one of the people on the panel, if you were in the entrepreneurship panel, said that go figure out how to get users and usage, right? Don't worry about money, don't worry about business models. You can always do interesting things with spreadsheets, right? And tweak numbers and get them to reflect whatever you want. You can't mess around with users and what users want and how to use products. So we very, very rarely, right, talk about what's the business model for this. Even for certain things where we've gone and paid billions of dollars, like YouTube, we're still trying to figure out what's the business model, right? Orkut was a social networking site. It's very, very popular in India and Brazil. We're still trying to figure out what's the business model, but we have millions and millions of users and usage. So both of these are very key to freeing up for yourself for innovation. So as you think about it in the context of your company, and it doesn't work always, right? If you're starting a company, like, again, there's a lot of advice from the panel on think about cash flow, think about paying customers, have someone. But if you're really thinking about innovation from a product point of view, you have to have certain parameters that you're willing to relax to help you create sort of world-class products. This is another interesting example, Google Calendar. One of my colleagues, Carl Sjogren, was the product manager for this. Again, the way this came about is they went around, and this time Carl was based in the US at the time and then moved to Australia. The way this came about is they would actually go and talk to moms, right, for their kids' calendars that they would post up on the refrigerators with magnets and see what they had, and then how would they communicate with their spouses or their dads, or the kids has a summer camp or whatever, and really look at it to come up with this notion of, for example, creating multiple calendars, right? So a lot of people have a family calendar and a work calendar and so on and so forth. Anyway, so point number 2, point number 1 was break the mold. Point number 2, focus on the user. The third one is we really, really believe in shipping early and often, right? And I'll talk about this later in terms of life at Google, but there's this insane amount of focus on launching products, right? Everybody in engineering and product gets measured on launching products. And so it's okay for it not to be beautiful and perfect and figured out to the umpteenth. We launch products really fast. So this is an example from Google India on Google Labs in India, where we launched a product where it's hard to type characters in Indic languages, in Hindi and so on. And I presume it's similar in Thailand, where you can phonetically type in English, right? So what you see here is Mera, which is the Devanagari script for Hindi, but the way we come up with this was typing in English. So you type M-E-R-A, which is the phonetic pronunciation for Mera, and then we'll transliterate it to Mera. And when we launch it first, we got slammed in the press and people saying, oh my goodness, how could Google ever launch a product like this? If I type this in Hindi, they would come up with funny, stupid translations where we were making mistakes. Now it's so phenomenally successful, we're going and integrating this with many of our products, and people are wanting to OEM this and have APIs for this that they can use in their technology. So again, we were willing to, even as Google with the brand, take the kind of black eye to sort of learn from our users and improve the quality of the algorithm. The next one, this is really messed up again in terms of color, but Google is really big believer in small teams, right? And many of you that work on agile ways, sort of methodologies to do development probably have this. So there isn't a one, here's this big organization with 100 people, and you have this mission and so on and so forth. Many things are bottoms up. Most really innovative, successful products start with one engineer or one product manager, right? So this thing that you hear about the 20% projects is really true. In fact, the example I showed you earlier on the transliteration, where you can type phonetically in English and get that converted to an index script, one engineer. In fact, most of these products start with one engineer that working on an idea that nobody else really believes in, saying this is never going to pan out, like it's not going to happen. And this person will go build a prototype, and then he'll go try to get other engineers or other product managers excited about it, or vice versa, right? So the first milestone is the prototype. Once you get a prototype and you get a few people excited, people will actually start donating 20% time. So it'll be like, I'll give you my 20% time because now I see the power of this idea or the power of this product that you're trying to build. And then it typically, not all products launch through labs. It'll go through labs or something like that. And then you'll get the so-called, there is people who are vice presidents and other things who will come in and say, oh my goodness, this is so big that we should really have a team of 10 engineers on this, or should have a team of 12 engineers on this. Why are 2 people trying to make this happen? So it's a very bottoms-up grassroots thing, which basically leads to a lot of different ideas and lots of different products. And some of them make it, and some of them don't, right? Another very interesting tool we have that we use at Google is a very simple thing, actually, just a mailing list for ideas, right? This is one of the best kept secrets at Google. So internally within Google, we have an ideas mailing list. Anyone who has any idea of any sort, right, can post it to that. Things as simple as, hey, when people come into the office, they have to go sign an NDA, and they have to go, call on a few people and this and that. Why don't we make it such that there's a little app where they can come and sign in, kind of on the screen, so to speak, prints out an NDA. Nobody's involved while that is happening. So the person who's at the reception is freed of that task. The host is freed of that task before they come to receive the visitor, whether they're interviewing or a partner or what have you. And so you keep posting these ideas globally, and there's literally like 10,000 employees subscribed to that mailing list. And then you go rate these ideas, right? So this is a horrible idea, will never fly. This is beautiful. Like, why didn't somebody think of this before? Or can I donate 20% time to this? And constantly with little things like Gmail, Gtalk, embedded in Gmail, that was from the ideas board, right? Somebody said, wait, I already have my contacts. These are the typical people I talk with. I have a Gtalk client, right? Why can't this be in here? So right from the context of my email, in fact, it started with saying in the context of my email, I want to ping someone saying, oh, you just sent me this mail about let's meet up for lunch and on Monday at this time. And then we sort of went and did that. So again, very bottoms up, lots of ideas, and let there be sort of a Darwinian thing for letting the best ideas survive. It's not just about all these ideas and creating a great atmosphere and so on. It's really also about the talent we hire. So there's a really high bar on people that we hire, and our founders are really obsessed about going to some of the top schools, right? And looking at hiring talent from the top schools. So that's kind of the biology part, and the chemistry part is also important, right? This goes back to the power of small teams, people working in really open workspaces together, and coming up with these new creative products. Okay, so before I go on, let me just sort of summarize this. So this is, if I had like one phrase, and this is not a Google phrase actually, this is a phrase from a very famous entrepreneur in India, Anil Ambani, who's one of the richest people in the world, actually probably one of the top 10 richest people in the world. But when I think about Google, this kind of applies to us, right? Think really big. You start very, very, very small. I can't think of a more smaller way to start than an engineer working for perhaps a day a week kind of thing. And then you scale fast, right? So as you see that something is working out or succeeding, then you go invest aggressively in it, and you start try to go build it. So this is sort of philosophy we live by. So let me just pause and take questions. I have just one more slide on life at Google or anything that people want to talk about. I didn't want to just do death by PowerPoint. So since such an abstract topic, but if there was a question there, Anthony. Yes. So that's a great question. There is no explicit way to ever kill things at Google because they live in the heads of engineers and product managers. So the only way we actually ever kill anything sort of from Google is just the whole Darwinian thing. You're not going to get explicit resources. If you can't convince other people, if you can't convince users, if you can't convince advertisers, depending on what you're trying to innovate on. So there are projects that have been going on for 5 years, right? With this one engineer who's like, someday, this is going to change the world. These people don't get it yet, right? But there's no explicit saying you shall not work on this project. On a 20% time, you can be like, I'm going to do this, for the next 10 years, and like, okay, knock yourself silly. I mean, there's nobody else who's convinced about it, or no other engineer, or no other product manager. But you can go on. So there's no. But yes, we are a very data-driven company, so we do track metrics very, very aggressively, right? So in terms of the big bets, so let's say something graduated from labs or had team of 10 engineers working on it, we will be monitoring every stat you can imagine on it, not just the usual stuff in terms of metrics by geo, by country, by page views, by distinct users, number of queries, time of day. We're just insanely data-driven analytical company. So we do monitor that, but very rare, unless it's like a really large thing where we go and say, you know what, we're not going to do this anymore. There was a question in the back.
Any improvements in Google Docs? It's actually a very good product, but it's lacking behind in the other Office.
Yeah, so let me just quickly repeat the question. So any improvement in Google Docs, it sort of seems to be lacking behind Microsoft Office or other products like that. So it's never really meant to be a document editor or a competitor to Office or Word or whatever. I mean, and that's really, really important, because if you go back to one of my 4 points, which was focused on the user, we figured out that there's a lot of emailing of attachments, a lot of collaborative document work that happens. Lots of different people are working on the same document at the same time, the same spreadsheet or what have you. And that problem wasn't being effectively solved. And in fact, I don't know if we stumbled upon it because of Gmail and Gmail attachments, but that's kind of how people came up with the idea. So earlier it was even more primitive editor, right? It was just upload a doc in a way that it's a shared workspace on the cloud, so that you can retrieve the doc for yourself, not even collaborate with someone else, not even a small team, right? And then we started getting requests such as the one you're making, saying, but wait a second, this isn't a rich text editor, and I want to bold and italicize and this and that, and I want to add other people, and I want to make it indexable and searchable, and we kept adding stuff. The intent has never been, and to the best of my knowledge, never is, to be a competitor or replacement for any of these Word editor products. It's just not. And in fact, the other thing that we found that is very refreshing for us is, it turns out that there's only about 15% of features that are used in some of these really rich, high-end Word products, right? Word-type products. And so therefore we're like, stay very thin and very light and make it work. And so we get the odd, a customer would be like, oh, but I want this, fancy way to, pivot tables and create fancy graphs while I'm getting it. And it's like, sorry, you can't do that, because 90% of our users probably don't want to do that. So, another question.
Yeah, Google always talks a lot about that 20% time. However, I've also heard very often that at Google they don't call it 20% time, but 120% time, because what it comes down to is...
Are you snooping in on our mailing lists?
So what's it really like? Is it really that people have basically one day out of the week where they can work on something of their own, or are they just working so much time already anyway in other projects that this is just extra overtime they're working for free?
So it is not I mean, you can go talk to pretty much any Google engineer, right? So it's not a marketing gimmick, but I think you're on the right point, that it's not like you carve out a day a week, like every Friday I shall work on whatever the hell I want to work on, because you do have products that you launch, and you do have things that you ship, and you do have customers or users or what have you, right? So it varies. Sometimes I'll find that engineers will go off, and their preferred mode of working is not in any defined way, but this month, the third week of this month, I'm just going to spend my time on this idea. I'm going to get together a bunch of people, do a dev hackathon, and we're going to just build this thing to a prototype, right? So basically, just count me out for that week. I'll have checked in my code for my regular day job or whatever it is, and done my code reviews and what have you. But in other cases, it would be like you're so passionate about it that it may end up becoming 120% time as opposed to a 20% time, right? But I think the magic about the 20% time is the belief and the implementation of that belief that nobody touches that time. Nobody touches what you get to work on, at least for some part of what you want to do, right? So if somebody said, I want to work on voice search, right? Like, actual voice search. I call in a phone and I say, I want to search for, Chula University, or I want to look up the phone number for Roadhouse Restaurant. Nobody can say, oh, you can't work on that. That's not, that's not a googly thing, or that's not in our roadmap, or we don't do that in search. It's like, I believe that people are going to search on voice. So we had an engineer in India, and we obviously have a product in the US called Goog 411, where literally on 20% time for the last 18 months, this guy was looking at Indian accents, which are very different and don't work on Goog 411, because we have these weird ways of saying things, and lots of different dialects and so on, to say this is a different problem and it will be interesting. And we, lo and behold, launched that product in Hyderabad a couple of, maybe 6 months ago, and just in that one city, and it was because of that persistence of that engineer. Anyway, so long story short, I have some users that have used it, but it's not really shippable quality code or what have you, but it's like these guys are really bright and they're focused on what the pain point is and solving the problem. So lots and lots of, I don't have the distribution, I don't work in corp dev, but from when we hear about it and interact with these teams, the average size of a company we acquire, I would not be shocked, or not the average, I would say the median must be no more than 10 or 15 people. So it's like small, fast-moving, very technical companies. And of course, there are the YouTube types where there are probably a couple of hundred people or something like that. One more slide, and then we'll open it up again for questions. I don't know if we have more time. So life at Google. Fantastic food. That's the first thing that comes to my mind. Really, really, really good food. Crazy smart colleagues, right? We have really good people to hang out with and work with and learn from. So that's very impressive. It's a very open, creative workspace. I have a picture here from one of our offices. I think it's in Zurich, if I'm not mistaken. But anyway, people just go knock themselves silly, right? I mean, I've seen people, and sometimes we have to go like stop these things, playing cricket in the midst of cubes while actually coming and really bowling, for those of you who know what cricket is. It's like, imagine throwing a baseball ball in the middle of the office, right? So it's a very open, creative atmosphere. Everybody, right? I would say 99.9% of employees sit in cubes, which are a very open culture. I'm in product management, as I said, sit with where the engineers sit. So we're literally, just swivel your chair and you're like talking to the engineer or vice versa. And there are some phenomenal building blocks, right? That the company's already built. So this whole notion of software as a service is sort of a living example of it. I know Amazon and eBay and many other folks are also doing things like that, where literally to work inside Google, I can take an idea from conception to release and launch it with real customers with millions of users around the world in a matter of weeks. So a month after I joined Google, we launched a product for cricket. This was in India. I sort of moved to India about a year ago, which said, so I'm a big cricket fan and sort of follow cricket and cricket scores all the time. And I came in and said, when I type the word cricket or India versus Sri Lanka or whatever, Australia versus Bangladesh, because there's a game going on right now or was going on yesterday, I should be able to get the score, right? What's the score at this minute? Because I may be somewhere or traveling, or I may want to look it up on my mobile phone. And it wasn't there. And literally, I would say maybe not 4, but 6 weeks after I joined, like my first day at Google with the orientation and everything, and what is my job going to be, we were able to launch that product in 13 countries, and we have millions of people using that, right? So basically, it's like you can go type any of these cricket-related phrases, and it will tell you the current score. So really, really good building blocks to basically innovate, right? You can have a lot of impact and take things to market pretty fast if you leverage the building blocks. You don't have to worry about infrastructure. You don't have to worry about distributed tables. You don't have to worry about replication. You don't have to worry about if your application goes crazy and suddenly starts having 1 million users, right? So it gives you that opportunity. That's pretty much what I had. So if, for whatever couple of minutes that are still left, we can take some questions. John?
Yeah. How can you find cricket interesting?
might be another beer batch tonight. Yeah. Well, we can talk about it then. So, any other questions? Final questions, comments?
How come Google don't have Thai office?
How come Google doesn't have a Thai office?
Yes, they have a very big market share in Thailand. Search is 90+%.
I'm sorry, what was the last thing?
For the search market, more than 90% of Thai market is through Google.
Right.
They don't have Thai office.
So I don't know very many. At least I can talk about engineering and product, right? Not necessarily for sales and business development and so on. I don't know of any company in the world that has as many distributed engineering offices as Google does. I think we're close to 50 engineering offices in 50 different cities, and it's insane. I used to work for IBM, and we would specialize in distributed development, and it was a nightmare. And we had like a dozen offices maybe, and we'd been doing it for decades, right? And it was just an absolute nightmare. I mean, one of the first things in software engineering is you sit where your other colleagues are so that you can talk. We have 50 offices, so we're constantly looking to sort of build engineering and product offices where the users are, the customers are, and most importantly, the talent is, right? So in fact, part of my trip here to Southeast Asia is to really travel and see, what's happening out here. What is the users and the usage of our products, who are the developers, et cetera, to figure out if we should do something in Southeast Asia, right? I doubt we'll have. We do business in like 160 countries. I doubt we'll have 160 engineering offices. I think that would be like a nightmare. And certainly for sales and BD, that's a fair comment. We can talk offline if you have some specific things there. Great, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it.